you right.
Interviews with haunting gurus. All right, me minions, prepare to genuflect and kiss the ring of the godfather of home haunting. From the Hallowed Haunting Grounds, it's Gary Corb. Gary!
Kiss my what? Did you say? Oh, ring. Okay, fine.
Just a ring. Your ring.
Just a ring.
Don't put words or anything else in my mouth.
In my mouth, exactly like that. But see, it's long distance, so we'd have to. Never mind. But wow. It's I feel so old. Oh my gosh! Like I said, when I was first starting out, it wasn't even called haunts. We were doing a Halloween show, a display, decorations, that sort of thing. But
you've come a long way, baby.
We have. We've
come a long way.
So have all of you. So have all the haunts, which I actually go get to see now. Now that I've stopped doing my show, I'm able to see what's actually out there, and some haunts are absolutely terrific. It's who knew? Who knew?
Absolutely. We'll get to them later, but we're here to talk about you. It's all about you tonight, baby. It's all about you.
Just don't ask me why I started doing this, because I can't. I have no idea. I had to. If I didn't do this, I don't know what I would have done.
Damn, that was the only question I had written down.
Exactly. I had the calling. What can I say? I saw the Haunted Mansion. It opened in 1969 when I was 10 years old, and the rest is history. I saw that. Yeah, I wanted to create that in my front yard, and I was too young to know that I couldn't, so I did, basically, and that's how it all began.
Okay, 1973 was your first show, right?
Yes.
I noticed that you like to call it a show versus the haunt.
Our first flyer, we didn't quite know what to call it, so we actually said, it's an incredible show, and we had show crossed out. We had presentation crossed out. We had extravaganza, we had that crossed out, trying to explain that we couldn't really explain it because it was like a theme park ride that you walk through. But we didn't want to put the term walk through because we thought people won't know what that means. So we said display, and we crossed that out. And we're still trying to figure out what the heck we did. What do you call that sort of thing?
I never called my yard a haunt, even in in the 80s or in the 90s. I would always say, yeah, it's my Halloween decorations.
Exactly. Decorations people could relate to. No, haunt is a more recent term. In 73, they sure weren't calling it that because others weren't really doing it. Halloween was sort of the underdog holiday. Rumors, fears of razor blades and apples and all this stuff. So people weren't even talking about Halloween. It was on the way out. I like to think we snatched it from the jaws of obscurity and wrestled it back to life in our own little way. Even years before I set it up in the front yard, I was doing little haunted shack shows in the backyard. I had a little playhouse that I never used as a playhouse. I called it the Haunted Shack. And I decorate it and then do sound effects. I grew up with tape recorders all over the place, a little Wallensack and this and that. So I was always into audio. And I did this whole soundtrack and would write my own music and all this thing, even at 8 or 9 years old. But I would set that up in the backyard, and all the neighborhood kids would come during the summer and see it. But once all the kids had seen it, it's like, okay, how do I get other people to come and see this thing? Now, everyone in the neighborhood has seen it. All their parents have seen it. All their grandparents have seen it. Then I thought, well, what if I schlep it into the front yard and set it up on Halloween when trick-or-treaters, when people come to your house anyway? It'll give them something to see on the way, up to the front door. And I tried to do that in like 1970 and 71 and 72, but I tend to procrastinate. And I had little things set up, but it wasn't really what I would call a display, a show, a haunt, until 73. When I finally got it together, I was determined to actually do it, and I actually bought 4 purple light bulbs from Akron, if anyone remembers Akron. And one of those purple light bulbs, flash forward now to today, is still working, a floodlight, and it's the light that we light our memorial gravestone. We now put out one gravestone marking where the show was from 1973 to 2005. And that first purple light bulb I bought back in 1973 is the one we still use today. I don't know why it's still working. So many other bulbs have come and gone, but that one is still working. They don't make purple floodlights quite like that anymore. But anyway, enough sentimentality. But
those were those ones that were made in the U.S. of A. That's why.
Absolutely.
Those were one of those Chinese built floodlights.
And before we discovered, planned obsolescence, they actually made it to work and last for years and years and years, and it has. We had stereo even at that time. Like I said, I sort of had
That was cutting edge for 1973.
Well, it was. I had a sort of an audio background. I had 2 Wallensack machines, and a Sony reel-to-reel. Well, talking all reel-to-reel here, but I hadn't discovered cassette loops or anything like that. So I would rewind tapes every few hours. Actually, I was recording on the slowest speed that would last several hours because I was to learn a lot about audio, but I knew that was important. And even then, I was sort of setting up what I like to think of as audio tableaus. In our show, we always had what we called stereo ghost effects, which were the sounds that would travel from the left channel to right channel. I'd put speakers in the yard that would play the left channel and speakers up in the trees that would play the right channel. And basically, I'd record a sound effect that traveled from left to right, and it would sound like a ghost or whatever the sound effect was flying out of the yard. And it was a simple little effect, and yet it's amazing how effective that was. When you put all the other elements together, people would say, "Oh, I love that effect of the ghosts flying out of the yard." And I would think, what are they talking about? They're talking about projection? What are they talking about? And I realized it was the audio that made them visualize, what was happening too. So audio has always been really important. I'm always amazed when I go to other haunts and they have like one speaker in the front yard playing the soundtrack or one music track or something. We had 50 speakers playing 50 tracks. Not our very first year, but we still had 5 or 10, and then the next year we had 15, the next year we had 20. So I always realized that audio was really important, especially if you're not mechanically minded, like I never was. And you couldn't really have all this motion. We always wanted to have ghosts, drinking tea and on a teeter-totter, basically creating Disneyland's Haunted Mansion graveyard scene in the front yard. That's how we started out. That was my intention. And not really being able to do all this mechanically, I thought, well, let me sort of add just a little depth with audio. So I'd add a lot of extra sound effects that would just sort of come on every once in a while. They'd just be a tape that would be playing, but I'd put like a couple minutes of silence in between, and then one, like a cat sound effect or something there, coming from a speaker much closer to where the audience would be, to add a little depth and that sort of thing. We became known for that. We utilized the yard well. We had a big yard that was like a double lot, and it was the only one around in our neighborhood. It called to do something with that space.
Now, what town was this in?
This is in Studio City, California. That's part of North Hollywood. So it's near the Hollywood Hills and all that. That sort of, and near the studios on Radford, which is a street here in Studio City, that used to film Gilligan's Island back in the 60s and Mary Tyler Moore show in the 1970s. And
cool.
But so it's Studio City, so it's right in the heart of North Hollywood, so to speak. And my dad was a musician, so he played in many films and many recordings, and so I grew up with audio. Like I said, we always had amplifiers, we always had reel-to-reel machines, and that sort of thing. And so like I said, I understood right from the beginning the importance of audio. Even though I sort of missed the heyday of radio, I still grew up listening to Stan Freberg and different artists that would do various skits, and I realized the importance of sound effects and that sort of thing. So I thought, well, why can't I apply that to Halloween? So we sort of, like I said, came up with our own sound effects. That's something else we always did also, is I never thought of buying sound effects. Well, actually, you couldn't really back at that time. You didn't have haunt records or even gravestones to buy or like props. So we started creating our own gravestones and sound effects, audio as well. And through the years, we never really got into buying anything, nothing store-bought. So when people would come to see the show, it was like entering another world. You would only see those things at our haunt. You'd only hear those things at our haunt. You couldn't hear or see them anywhere else because we had developed them ourselves. And I'm still amazed when I see other haunts that buy stuff off the shelf, so to speak, and don't disguise that fact. They don't go to the trouble, for lack of a better term, to personalize it, to make it part of their scene, whatever that scene is. We also always tried to go for a unified theme. There is the mix and match type of haunt that goes from the morgue to the mad scientist laboratory to the spaceship to the graveyard, that sort of thing. We sort of were more scenically consistent and then sort of developed a mythology. Like I said, I grew up with Disneyland and the Haunted Mansion and that whole sort of thing, so I understood the backstory, so to speak, and having a mythology and entering another world, therefore, another time, another place, right there in the heart of Studio City. I mean, there's an apartment building next door and an alley right there, but all of a sudden you enter this little world that doesn't look like any other place that you've ever been or seen and doesn't sound like any other place. And that added a lot to the eeriness, to the creepiness of it. We were sort of that type of show. We weren't blood and guts or anything like that, because I always said you get every day anyway. You can see that on the news, you can see that in the newspaper. We were more ethereal, spiritual, that sort of thing, a little more creepy. I mean, we freaked out a lot of kids who were very blasé to, blood and guts sort of thing, but this was just a creepy atmosphere, and that's a lot more difficult to pull off, but for us, a lot more satisfying.
Did your haunt go through different themes over the years?
One thing I wanted to do very early on was develop several different haunts that we could sort of change over the years. Like I wanted to do one year a ghost town that would be all sort of Western theme, and then the counter melodies, the music would be like a lone harmonica coming from over there, and one of the stereo ghost effects tableaus would be like a lone train off in the distance over there that you'd hear on the horizon, and then over there a wolf would howl in response, and little audio tableaus like that, and and enter this deserted mine shaft and all that thing. Well, it never really turned out that way, because it was so much work, because we were starting from scratch, each year as far as the setup would go, that we sort of started developing more gothic props. It seemed a shame not to use those props each year, so we sort of early on abandoned the idea of really changing the show out each year, though that would have been fun to do if we really had 2 or even 3 different shows. And it's like, okay, which one are we going to set up this year? Well, we set up that one last year. Let's go back to Gothic this year, and the next year we'll do the Ghost Town one like that. But that was an idea that was never to be. So basically, after years of just recreating the Haunted Mansion graveyard scene of Grim Grinning Ghosts come out to socialize, over the years we sort of came up with our own scenes and phased out the Disney scenes. It was actually in 1981 was our final year of doing the Haunted Mansion style, with Madame Leota, talking statue, and Grim Grinning Ghosts for the song in the graveyard. That was last year of that, and the following year we decided to go more monk. I wrote a monk chant with a counter melody coming from the organ and the house and all that sort of thing. But it was sort of a disaster. I mean, people loved it. I mean, the audience loved it. We were so disappointed because we did about 20% of what we had planned, and we didn't get the monk costumes. Someone else was sewing monk costumes for us. Meanwhile, I was making the chicken wire frames for the figures. And they brought out these costumes over about 5 o'clock Halloween, night. It's getting dark. And to try to dress chicken wire frames, of course, we had to bend it, to get the fabric on. And that completely ruined the shape of the figures. We also had a crypt that was about 5.5 feet tall, for sort of forced perspective. But the monks were like 6 or 6.5 feet tall. So we have a picture of one towering over the crypt. So it was not that good a year. Plus, we had one scene that we had developed where a monk would be leaning over a well, and we couldn't quite get him to sit up quite right. So by the end of the evening, he was sort of bending over with his monk butt up in the air. But so we thought, okay, we have to make major changes by next year. We also, that was our first year of someone had taken flash pictures of our show, and we realized that, all of our extension cords are white. Oops. Let's make the show flash-proof, so to speak. So we made, in '83, a major investment in all-black extension cords to kind of make it what we call flash-proof, and also make it a little more daylight-friendly. For years, people would come by and we'd say, don't take any pictures in the daytime. It's meant to be seen at night. There's special effects, all that sort of thing. And over the years, we sort of made it a little more daylight-friendly, so it looked like a creepy graveyard in the daylight. And then at night, with the lighting and the projection effects and that sort of thing, that was magic time. I didn't realize that by adjusting all the speakers sort of into the middle of the yard, in the middle of the space, you didn't really hear the sound from down the street, which is a good thing as far as our neighbors were concerned. But when you finally reached the border of the yard, all of a sudden you'd be enveloped in the sound that almost hadn't been there, a few steps before. These are all things we developed over the years. Like I said, the first couple of years I did it with a few school friends who then moved away or developed other interests or that sort of thing. But one friend, Greg McLaurin, joined the show in 1973, the third year of the show, without ever even seeing the show. But he was a big Disneyland fan as well, and a fan of the Haunted Mansion. His dad had a sound projector, the Super 8 sound. Ooh, that was a biggie back in 1975. So we, recorded the talking statue. I guess we were still using the Disney soundtrack at that time, and I would lip sync to the Eleanor Audley track of Madame Leota, and project that onto store-bought wig head. But we do, expanded polystyrene or fiberfill, that sort of thing, for the fiberfill stuff, for the hair, and sort of make it a little more like a statue where it didn't look so much like a wig head. But we would shave off the eyes and shave off the mouth so that it would be a smoother projection surface. And so we always did the special effects like Disney. I didn't know for sure how Disney had done certain things. I hadn't really heard the term Pepper's Ghost when I first saw the ballroom scene, but I just realized, if I were to do that, how would I do that? And later on I learned that the ideas that I had for that were actually pretty darn close to what they had developed.
Are those Pepper's ghosts?
A lot of the ghosts inside the house were. We had have a nursery scene we developed. I think 1985 was the first year of the nursery. We had an organ chamber in there, and the organist was a Pepper's ghost, so that he could disappear and reappear sitting there. But then we moved him into another room, and that little room became the nursery. We were sort of blessed because we had several rooms in the house that you would look in through windows into. So we had sort of restricted the audience viewing area, so to speak, because the larger the viewing area is, the bigger pieces of glass you need, because we always would cover our bases from one side of the window to the other. You need a big piece of glass so the image doesn't cut off in the reflection. You think your listeners, anyone who's tried to do a Pepper's Ghost gag, knows what I'm talking about. And luckily, we have a glass shop within walking distance. One year, we needed to buy a new piece of glass every day because as we would power down the show and start taking pictures of things, little accidents would happen. And one year, we broke a pane of glass. That's all. A pane a day. That's all we ask. We were saying. On the nursery scene, like I said, was easy to hide the glass because the window wasn't all that big looking in there. When we moved the organist into the living room scene, which was the seance room sometimes and then became the music room, it was a much bigger room, and so we needed to hide the edges of the glass by leaning it against a music stand on one portion, and then we had a skeletal harpist that was also Pepper's Ghost that would appear and disappear, and that we would lean against a little pedestal or something on another side of the room with some flowers on it. And just basically the old magician's trick of misdirection. You wouldn't see the other edges of the glass because we put something else in the foreground to take your attention away, or much further back against the back wall, sort of that point. So you'd focus on another part of the room and not right where the glass was. And of course, beyond the glass would be the reflection of the image. In the case of the organist, it was a Super 8 projection. But in case of the skeletal harpist, that was actually a three-dimensional figure that was in a little box under the table, skeleton thing, that we used a Westinghouse record player motor, and we just sort of attached coat hangers to the each end of the turntable, and made little hands, skeletal hands that we put on the end of that, and that would just sort of go around constantly as if someone were playing a harp. And that was a separate mechanism from the torso itself of the figure, and we just sort of line it up. There are pictures on our website behind the scenes, beneath the Hallowed Haunting Grounds, that show the setup for the skeletal harpist. But it was nice that figure was three-dimensional, because you could walk along the edge of the porch and see the perspective change slightly as you walk that way. The organist was just two-dimensional, so if you look really carefully, it would look a little flat, but that's why he would disappear as often as he would. And we also had, he was in white tails, so the tails would sort of hang below the level of the organ bench, which also add that dimension, nicely, that he was sitting right there on the bench. So you'd see the reflection there. Meanwhile, the pane of glass is actually several feet closer to the audience, and so you wouldn't even think about focusing there. So we got pretty good at Pepper's Ghost after a while. But it's impossible to photograph. There was a documentary made by on a TV show called America that just had several, I think it was 3 10-minute segments in a half an hour about the wacky people in America, what they do. And one segment was these wacky people in Studio City who set up this Halloween display. And they actually tried to film our the music room scene, the organist and the harpist, and they got pretty good footage. We were doing the show for several years and didn't have any pictures of what the final result was. So we said, we got to start documenting this thing. And that's when we started looking at it and kind of going, ew, is that really what it looks like? And we started making major improvements, shall we say, after that, after we could actually see it from the audience perspective and realize, okay, it's not as good as we thought it was. That's another reason we got away from the Disneyland Haunted Mansion scenes with the emphasis on figures, balancing a teeter-totter on a gravestone or drinking tea at a tea party. We realized we can't make legs. We can't have figures that look like human figures or ghostly figures because they don't look human, they don't look right. So let's go with monks. They wear robes and we don't have to worry about the rest of the figures. We just have to get the arms right and the rest just sort of hangs there. That's why we sort of developed the monk mythology in 1983. After the show was starting to embark on its second decade of haunting.
What were a couple of the original props that you made?
Like that. The original props that we made were like the ghosts sitting on the teeter-totter. We made several versions of the teeter-totter because the first one, of course, didn't move, wasn't motorized at all. The problem was we had all these supposedly action scenes. We're using grim-grinning ghosts come out to socialize, and they're all just sitting there, and the graveyard looks dead. No pun intended. But it's like, okay, the contrast is supposed to be the graveyard is lively because all these ghosts have come out and are inhabiting the graveyard, and yet it didn't quite match the audio. Like I said, I had all this audio going on and the sound going on, and the figures are all just sort of sitting there, and it's like, okay, something's wrong with this. So it was one of those record player turntables that I finally got working. 79 or 80, I think, was the first year. It was actually motorized and working all night long.
That was kind of the beginning of animatronic props.
Exactly.
Where they were moving. Okay.
Right, it was in 1980. But the year before, in 79, we actually developed basically a mobile system. We did this for what we call the floating lantern scene. It was a grave with a shovel in it and a lantern floating above it as if the caretaker had been frightened away or a ghost was there, or whatever backstory you wanted. But it was basically a floating lantern. And what it was actually a mirror ball motor that we had put basically 2 curtain rods on, like a mobile system, like a mobile that would hang above a baby's crib or something. Mm-hmm. So we'd have one rod about 4 feet long. We basically used whatever we had. I think we had 2 metal rods, who knows why. My folks bought the house in 1951, so we had a ton of stuff lying around that had accumulated over the years. So we always had stuff lying around. So of course we'd have 2 curtain rods or something there. So we would hang one down, and then another hangs off the edge of that one, one end of that one, to hang out, a few feet more. There's like a diagram of that. And put the lantern on one far end of that. And then we'd have, like I said, the mirror ball motor would be going around. And I used one of those flasher plugs that used to be on Christmas light strings, where you put it on and they would sort of cut the power off for a second, and then it would come back on. And we put that on the motor. And basically, when you have those old disco ball motors, is what this was, when the motor would come back on, it would reverse direction. So it actually gave a really nice random movement to the whole mobile system. And then when you consider that it's one curtain rod going this way and then one hanging off the end sticking out further that could turn independently, and then the lantern on one end of that, you would never know what the lantern was going to go. It would be making like a little circle here, then it would move way out toward the audience, and it was very random. We used this for all the life of the show from 1979 to 2005, and as technology developed, you'd hear comments from people, that, oh, this must be computerized. They have this elaborate tracking system up there in the tree that switches from one track to another. They kept coming up with more, high-tech explanations for our extremely low-tech scene that we had developed years earlier, and we just stuck with the low-tech technology that really was extremely effective, because you couldn't really do that with, not with our budget, which was zero. Unless you really had an elaborate tracking system that would switch from one track to another and go this way, and it'd be programmed and all that stuff. We didn't bother with any of that stuff. We just made a big, mobile system, and it was quite effective. We then had a flickering, the lantern would flicker also, color organ hooked up to. I think I used a reel-to-reel machine to create feedback, like a tone or something like that way, on a really bad tape that had a flutter in it. So you get this sound like that. Hook up a color organ to it, and it would flicker. And that was our flicker system. We'd have a different channel for each lantern, so they wouldn't all be flickering at once. And then years later, found a Christmas light string, little twinkle lights. Silvestri, I think, used to make those, that would have some ballast bulbs, some steady burning bulbs, and others that would take up the surge on that string. And half would go on and off, and half would just take up the surge. And the whole string would then flicker like that. And I thought, that's a nice lantern flicker movement for candles or lanterns. And basically, then we cut those strings and had those in our control room. We'd have the bulbs on the string that would go completely on and off, hidden backstage, so to speak, and then would extend the string out to whatever scene we would need in the graveyard or in the house for lanterns or candles that would take up the rest of the surge of that line that would then flicker, and that's how we did our candle flicker. If we had a candelabra with 5 different candles on it, we'd have 5 different Christmas cords running to that, so each string would flicker independently, so each candle would be flickering independently. Again, an extremely low-tech solution to what would look like a high-tech effect, but you can actually do it for no money whatsoever. Basically, our show was a ma and pa show made by what you have lying around the house, and yet somehow we were able to make it look like it was an extremely elaborate and expensive show to put on. Well, it eventually became an expensive show to put on because the price of projector bulbs, became more and more expensive.
Keep your eyes peeled to this channel for part 2 of my interview with the late Gary Corb of the dearly departed Hallowed Haunting Grounds.
I'm going now. Heaven help you.
Please like, subscribe, comment, and share. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you won't miss any haunt content that is dead ahead.